We've spoken many times on JTV about the Nazi origins and collaboration of the Palestinian movement. The first leader, I suppose, of the Arabs of then British mandate controlled Palestine was Hajj Amin Al-Husseini. We know that he met with Hitler. We know that he told Hitler that once Hitler had killed all the Jews of Europe, he wanted to lead the way in killing the Jews of the Arab world. But I came across recently something that I had never seen before, which is a whole new level of collaboration and insight that we have, which is that Hajj Amin Al-Husseini, who you see in this picture over here, actually visited the concentration camps. The leader of the Arabs of British Mandate of Palestine came to Nazi Europe to see firsthand and enjoy and learn from the killing and genocide of the Jews of Europe. So those who say that the Palestinian cause is based on legitimate grievance, the leaders wanted the Jews dead before there was an Israel. And I want to talk to you about this evidence that has come to light recently in the last few years and these particular pictures, because they give us a new level of insight into what really went on and the level of collaboration, and it just hones in the truth on a totally new level. So I want to read to you an article from Tablet magazine and talk you through the evidence that they found. So in 2017, Jerusalem's Kedem auction house posted 3 of 6 previously unknown photos on the internet in which the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was the spiritual and political leader of the Arabs of British Mandate of Palestine, Amin al-Husseini, inspects a Nazi concentration camp along with Nazi senior officials and government figures. According to the auctioneers, an expert was of the opinion that these inmates performed forced labour at the Trebin camp, which is near Berlin, which was from 1942 until 1945 an SS artillery training place, with a branch of the another concentration camp nearby. Built after World War I as a Christian city of peace, it was taken over by the SS in 1935. Among the prisoners were Jews from Hungary. Forced labour, terror and violence characterised their daily lives. Kedem hoped viewers would help identify men in the photos. I want to show you another photo now as well, just so you can see what it is that I'm looking at. So have a look at this picture over here. And here we see various Nazi officials alongside Amin al-Husseini, who is there in the middle. So the article continues, as it turns out, I can now shed light on 5 of the foreign guests in the pictures, global leaders whose presence reflects the trans-regional history between Europe, the Middle East, India and America. The photographs also provide irrefutable proof that all of the men present had precise knowledge of the fate of Jews in Hitler's Germany and of the likely fate of Jews in their own home countries under Nazi rule. According to Kedem, the photos are stamped Photo Gerhard's Trebin. This stamp indicates that they were probably photographed in Trebin, 30 kilometers south of Berlin, around 1943. The 6 photos were auctioned for $12,300 to a private individual who, I would argue, should post the remaining 3 images on the internet as a humanitarian gesture to families of the prisoners. Only 3 of the 7 men pictured survived World War II and its immediate aftermath. The 2 German officials in uniform were both directly involved in the Holocaust. Before and after their trip to the camp, Adolf Hitler met separately with each of the foreign guests, who included the Palestinian leader al-Husseini, the former Iraqi Prime Minister Ali al-Kelani, the Croatian Ustasha ideologue Mile Budak, and the Indian Hindu leader Subhas Chandra Bose. So who were they? Budak was the ideologue of Croatia's ethno-radical anti-Semitic Ustasha party, which ran a Nazi satellite state formed in 1941. On the left is Dr. Fritz Grober, a former envoy to Kabul, Baghdad and Jeddah. He was a Protestant and not a member of the Nazi party. He had been in charge of the Middle East in the German Foreign Office since early 1942. Grober and the 2 Arab leaders pictured had supported the anti-British coup in Iraq, which was followed by the Al-Farhud pogrom in mid-1941. In it, 179 Jews were killed and many stores looted. Masterminds like Al-Kalani and Al-Husseini wanted to signal there in a 2,500-year-old community how Arabia's Jews should be treated. In the second photo, which is the one you're seeing here, is the politician Arthur Seyss-Inquart. So that's this photo that you're seeing on the screen, who presided over Hitler's Anschluss of Austria in 1938 and 2 years later served as commissioner for the occupied Netherlands. He oversaw the deportation of 100,000 Jews to death camps and the enslavement of 500,000 Dutch people, half of whom were forced to go to Germany as slave labourers. After the Nuremberg trials in 1946, Seyss-Inquart ended up on the gallows for his crimes against humanity. Budak shared this fate a year earlier in Zagreb, where he was hanged as a war criminal for his policy of sending Jews, Serbs, Sinti and Roma to death camps. On the other hand, both Arab leaders continued their anti-Jewish and Islamist policies unimpeded after the end of the war. Al-Kalani until 1965 and Al-Husseini until 1974. Outside of Israel, Nazism had hardly been delegitimized in the Middle East, and its adherents often came to power after the war ended. The Iraqi Al-Kalani staged a coup in Baghdad but failed. He was sentenced to death, then exiled to Beirut. Al-Husseini also found himself in Beirut, where he was active in the World Islamic Congress, which he founded in Jerusalem in 1931. He opened a Berlin branch a year later. With robust backing, he rose to become the first global Grand Mufti. A mufti is a religious and legal authority who hands down rulings on everyday issues to believers in his jurisdiction. His late half-brother, Kamil, was the previous Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. Al-Husseini received the title in 1921, and in order to preserve and expand his trans-regional Mid-East Europe legacy after 1945, he chose as his representatives Saeed Ramadan for Europe in Switzerland and Yasser Arafat in the Middle East. The Mufti advised Arafat in 1968 to take over the Palestine Liberation Organization, which he headed until 2004, and to, quote, liberate Palestine, operating out of Gaza with Fatah troops. Unmentioned but visible in photo 1, and I'll get up photo 1 for you again to see, though the angle and quality mar it, it almost certainly is Indian nationalist Subhas Chandra Bose. Also called Netaji, Hindi for the respected leader, he probably died in a mid-1945 plane crash near Taiwan. Controversy over his role diminished in 1997 when he was given his place in the Indian pantheon of liberation leaders. However, questions linger about his close Nazi contacts and meetings in 1942 in Berlin with Hitler and SS chief Heinrich Himmler. Since the first photo shows flowering plants, it probably dates from the second half of 1942 when Bose was still in Berlin, making the identification all the more likely. Starting with European explorers in 1760, 5 generations have connected the West and the Middle East. The 2 Germans in the picture are from the 5th generation of Europe's Middle East experts. Born in the 2 decades before 1900, their careers were based within the expanding network of academic institutions devoted to the region. 21 universities with 57 lecturers in Middle Eastern studies. Additionally, there were non-university institutes such as the Berlin Seminar for Oriental Languages, where Grober learned Turkish, and Hamburg's Colonial Institute under Karl Heinrich Becker, a founder of modern Islamic studies. This expansion followed the post-1884 period of the so-called German Mid-Eastern founding years. 3 decades in which Germany did not colonize the region but nonetheless dynamically enlarged its presence there. Born in 1886, Fritz Grober survived World War II and 10 subsequent years in the Soviet Gulag. After his release in 1955, he advised Bonn on Middle East policy as a retiree until 1973. Another German diplomat, who appears in the pictures but is not mentioned in the Kedem catalogue, is Martin Luther, who served as Under-Secretary of State in the Foreign Office. He conspired against his boss, Joachim von Ribbentrop, and as a result was sent to a concentration camp in early 1943. He died shortly after the end of the war. During World War I, Luther served with an Army Railroad regiment up to the Balkans, where he heard about the Armenian genocide. 2 decades later, as head of the German Department of the Foreign Office, he was one of the 15 Nazis at the Wannsee Conference who coordinated the logistics of mass murder. About 100 Asia fighters who served alongside Germany's Ottoman allies during World War I rose to Nazi leadership after 1933, many of whom served the West German government in Bonn after 1950. The auction text mentions Al-Husseini, the other key figure in this group. Some see Al-Husseini's Nazi contacts as reflecting a pragmatic interest in obtaining a strong foreign ally for Arab national goals. Others link the Mufti's enthusiasm for Nazi plans for the final solution to his additional desire to bring genocide to Palestine and the Middle East. The new pictures are important evidence in this debate. What is certain is that al-Husseini rose to become the primary non-European aide and activist for Hitler's Middle East. Interrogated by the Soviets in 1946, Grobba confirmed Hitler's and von Ribbentrop's plans for genocide in the Middle East. Some say the Mufti embodied the Palestinian national consensus, a claim that rests on the supposition that a Palestinian nation existed prior to World War II. Surely not all Palestinian Arabs should be associated with al-Husseini, whatever his titles and ambitions. Some of them worked against the Axis powers. As officers, Grobba and al-Husseini were brothers in arms in 1915, including in areas where Armenians were deported. Both men spoke Turkish. They met during the 30s in Iraq, where the German envoy Grobba dealt with Iraqi state representatives and grew to dislike al-Husseini. In his eyes, a cleric without a state styling himself the Grand Mufti should not act as a politician. Their mutual dislike increased after the failed Baghdad coup against the British in mid-1941. A British advisor in Iraq defended the Grobba in the Times, saying he was not a Nazi Lawrence of Arabia, stirring up Muslims, but rather a hard-nosed career diplomat. Berlin then grew suspicious of Grobba. Rumours circulated that he had invited Jews to his receptions, that he was a Freemason, and that he preferred al-Kalani to the Mufti. His career faltered as he was caught between the two Arabs, frequently arguing over who would be the real leader. Hitler's choice was clear: al-Husseini. He saw in the Mufti a principal actor in the Middle East, and a realist. Benito Mussolini followed Hitler's lead and recognized the Mufti as the most competent spokesman for the Arabs who could help facilitate the fascist-Nazi alliance in reshaping North Africa. It was against the political backdrop that SS chief Heinrich Himmler invited select Nazis and their guests to visit his concentration camp system. At the end of June, Grobba noted the two Arabs each instructed two of their aides to join an SS training course that included a visit to a concentration camp. Al-Kalani wanted to go along to see if this system could be a model for Iraq, where there was a large Jewish community. Grobba agreed. The assistants were going away, so there was nothing wrong with it. Still, the SS asked the German Foreign Office to sign on. That was Luther's business. Most likely he consulted with his expert on Jews, Franz Radmacher, for whom the Mufti secured asylum in Syria after the war. Radmacher directed the deportation and killing of Serbian Jews in Belgrade. He wrote on his expense account as the purpose of the official trip: liquidation of the Jews. He also drafted the Madagascar plan with officials of the Vichy regime to forcibly deport Jews to the island, a French colony. Confirmed by Hitler in the spring of 1940, the idea was nevertheless abandoned because the British retains their maritime supremacy, making large transports impossible. On December the 18th, 1940, Hitler issued Order No. 21, Barbarossa, preparing the invasion of Soviet Russia. The Nazi invasion on June 22nd was followed by the mass shooting of Jews. At the turn of the year, Himmler began building death camps in occupied Poland at Chelmno, Belzec, Sobibor and Treblinka. From the spring of 42, the death camps used poison gas, like in Auschwitz, to exterminate millions of Jews who were transported there from ghettos and labour camps. Following the initial Nazi victories in North Africa, Hitler ordered Arabs trained in the desert warfare and al-Kalani to take part. Erwin Rommel's army rolled into Egypt and was poised to invade Palestine and Iraq. On April 28th, the Mufti carried out the pan-Arab flag on his car. The Iraqi had himself addressed an Az-Zaim Führer signed a secret letter with Berlin and Rome for joint struggle until final victory, and for liquidation of the Jewish home in Palestine. To be clear, this always meant killing Jews. This was a quadrilateral, Palestine-oriented genocide pact for Jew-free Arab lands or empires, signed by the two Arab leaders and by the Axis foreign ministers. In June, the SS affirmed an Arab tour of the Sachsenhausen camp. In mid-July, Hitler agreed with al-Kalani to fight enemies together until final victory. Luther read Grobba's report, in which an officer spoke to the four Arabs, gave them a 2-hour tour of the camp, and they inspected captive Jews in formation. The guests were excellently impressed by everything. Luther found the experience unpleasant, so Grobba promised not to agree to further Arab concentration camp tours. Al-Husseini, who some saw as a possible caliph, then pushed Grobba out of Arab politics. The German was sent to work in French archives in Paris as a Christmas gift. a move against which Al-Kalani protested in vain. In February 1943, Bose left Germany while Luther became a prisoner in Sachsenhausen after his failed coup against von Ribbentrop. Subhas Chandra Bose sought Nazi help to drive the British out of India during World War II, just as some other Indians had previously sought help from the Germans to fight the British during World War I. Kaiser Wilhelm gave India's nationalists money, weapons, and expert. Wilhelm's military attaché in America, Franz von Papen, directed this Hindu-German conspiracy. Von Papen was caught and had to leave the United States on Christmas 1915. Later, he fought with the Ottomans in Palestine. Hitler appointed von Papen envoy in Ankara, a valuable Middle East post, where von Papen and Al-Husseini profited from the stolen gold trade of Deutsche Orient Bank. Berlin united Indians and Arabs in World War I in order to incite them to rebel against the British. The German effort included funding periodicals, assigning experts, and sponsoring travel to faraway lands like Afghanistan to incite Islamist revolts and to attract clerics for Old and New Brotherhood under German influence. This framework helped Bose when he arrived in Berlin in early 1941, looking for aid. At the end of that year, Himmler ordered volunteers to be recruited as SS troops, and Bose created a Free India Centre and used the name Azad Hind for both his Indian Legion and a radio station in mid-1942. His 3,000 men were joined by many British Indians captured by General Rommel in Libya. On May 29th, Hitler received Bose in Berlin. I want to show you this picture so you can see what it is that we are talking about. Let's have a look at this picture here. Okay. So, Hitler received Bose in Berlin. The Hindu leader handed him a document detailing how he wanted to attack the British by means of Indian mass uprisings. The timing wasn't bad. Hitler's blitzkrieg against Russia had stalled, and the Nazi leader was now pushing for the inclusion of Dutch, Indian, Arab, and Croatian troops in his power pyramid. He told Bose that they had common enemies: the English, the Bolsheviks, and the Americans. Germany's ambition of destroying Russia would help Japan in East Asia and Bose in India. Submarine attacks, airstrikes on British centres, and on the defeated British troops in North Africa would help India and provide the country with soldiers for its liberation. Perhaps he would reach India's border in 2 years, Hitler said. Then he could ask Bose to invade there jointly. Meanwhile, he would start his anti-British revolt, which would tie down British troops. Moreover, he might win over the Japanese. As an old revolutionary, Hitler told Bose he might be able to incite a domestic revolt, but only if this uprising would be protected from the outside by a foreign military power. Gandhi's passive resistance and Nehru's hostility to fascism and Nazism would achieve nothing. Bose, Hitler continued, needed to get closer to India. As a man of stature, he should avoid boarding a plane that the British could force down. A submarine would be safer. So Bose, who was married to a then pregnant Austrian woman, transferred from a German U-180 submarine to the Japanese I-29 near Madagascar and arrived in Japanese-occupied Sumatra. The Mufti arrived at Bellevue Palace in Berlin on November the 6th and met with Bose. Both agreed on propaganda maneuvers. Al-Husseini used the next 22 days until his meeting with Hitler to solicit from Nazi leaders 2 commitments: the end of legal travel by Jews to the Middle East. Himmler ordered it on October 23rd, both Arabs having demanded the liquidation of the Jewish home again on September 24th in their 11 points, and to, quote, eliminate all the Jewish home's effects and results. To build consensus for his ambitions within the Nazi state, the Mufti consulted German and Italian envoys in Vichy and Rome on such points as Syria, the Arab Legion, and an Axis declaration on Arabia. On November the 20th, Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop told him that Palestine was purely Arab and met him twice before talking to Hitler, and the following day, when he likewise received Bose. Alluding to the looming Japanese invasion of Pearl Harbor, the foreign minister told the Indian that Japan and America would soon experience a state of conflict that could lead to war. On November the 22nd, Radmacher penned a memorandum about the ideas of the Foreign Office for the overall resolution of the Jewish question in Europe, which Luther took to the Wannsee Conference. These ideas included the deportation of Jews from the German Reich and from occupied Europe to the east, and the imposition of Nuremberg-style anti-Jewish laws everywhere in Europe. The Mufti's meetings over his 22 days in Berlin centered around debates about the Arabia Declaration by Berlin and Rome, which his Undersecretary Uthman Kamal Haddad took down and handed over to Grobba on February the 25th, 1941. And I want to show you a picture of that, which we have here. So in this picture, you see from the left, Fritz Grobba, Uthman Kamal Haddad, and then Amin Al-Husseini on the right. This declaration had been maturing since mid-1940. Its Clause 7 stipulated that Berlin and Rome would declare a Jewish homeland in Palestine illegal. Furthermore, they had recognised the right of Arabs, including those in Palestine, to solve the question of Jewish populations there, quote, in the Arab national interest, and in the same manner as the question has been resolved in the Axis countries. Radmacher's text stipulated that Jews be deported to Eastern Europe. It mentions nothing about the Middle East, although immigration had previously been Hitler's preferred course of action. The Havara Pact of 1933 allowed for about 60,000 German Jews to emigrate to Palestine up until 1939. Al-Kalani's military agreement with Berlin provided that the Axis military occupation would be replaced by a civilian government after 6 months, and it is clear what Iraq's Jews would have faced in those 6 months. Meanwhile, Berlin and Rome honed their Arabia Declaration up until Hitler received the Mufti. The two men met for 95 minutes on Friday, November the 28th. And this, by the way, is a famous picture that has been seen many times before. And if you haven't seen it, I'll show it to you now, so it's crystal clear. Here you can see Hitler and Amin Al-Husseini meeting. Let me just drop that into our video. And here they are. And we're going to talk about what occurred in their meeting. So, in the meeting, Hitler revealed to Al-Husseini his plan to kill Jews in Europe, the Middle East and globally, and his desire to invade Iraq and Iran. His guess was to wait until Nazi troops reached the southern point of departure from the Caucasus. Von Ribbentrop had already planned the Tbilisi moment, when the Nazis reached the Middle East and India via the Suez Canal, and or the Caucasus via the Georgian city. From there, the Arabs and Boers were to call for revolts from Jerusalem via Baghdad to Calcutta, form governments in exile, and then proceed homeward with the Nazis. Al-Husseini agreed with Hitler and waited his order. Their genocidal pact was a further marker in the spiral of wartime escalations against Jews that intensified on January 30th, 1939, when Hitler threatened before the Reichstag that a new world war be followed by the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. The threat he repeated again in a public speech at the end of January 1942 in Berlin. To Al-Husseini, he went further, promising him the annihilation of the Jews of the Middle East and globally. Because of Japan's approaching attack on Pearl Harbor 10 days later, which Hitler had learned of in advance, the subject of total world war came up. Hitler now wanted to realize plans far beyond the German Reich. When the Mufti left, Hitler laid down 4 points with von Ribbentrop. He put on hold the Arabia Declaration, which he discussed with Mussolini. It was not until 12 days later that the short text, complete with photos and film, arrived without the date of the meeting. Hitler's adjutant office did not release the text until December the 9th, 1941, and the press reported it the following day, again without a date. The delay serving to obscure the specific context to Hitler's meeting with Al-Husseini. Hitler also planned to install an Arab Islamic Leadership Council in Berlin that would agree to his recording of the Middle East. However, the evening after Al-Husseini left, Hitler triggered the Wannsee Conference. Now that America's entry into the war, like Hitler's counter-declaration of war, had become inevitable. Luther received the invitation to the Wannsee Conference on Saturday, November the 29th, and later his minutes were the only ones to survive. Most likely Hitler made his decision for the Wannsee Conference after his Friday meeting with Al-Husseini. He set the date for the meeting of the Undersecretaries of State in a villa on Lake Wannsee for December the 9th. With the global distraction of Japan's attacks on Pearl Harbor, Hitler saw his chance to keep the meeting under the radar. On Saturday, Hitler told Rome's foreign ministers that the war against Russia had been won in principle, and that he was now turning his attention to the Middle East. Though he badly underestimated the Russia counter-offensive and the effects of the Russian winter on his armies. Soon Eichmann was explaining the final solution to the Mufti in his map room. In their planning and strategizing, Hitler and his guests followed patterns of the German-Ottoman jihadization of Islamism in World War I, inciting insurrections and eliminating minorities that were seen as troublesome. Even though Hitler had in 1925 dismissed jihad in the service of Berlin as the pleasant thrill of thinking that others are willing to shed their blood for us, he now asked India's and Arabia's nationalists and Islamists to do just that. In turn, they offered him revolts and legions. After the war, the Mufti said the Nazis had not needed him, but Hitler's order number 30 Iraq and number 32 Russia relied on liberation movements as natural allies. Meanwhile, genocides under the Vichy regime were already envisaged in North Africa and failed in Iraq and other Middle Eastern countries. Still, continuing Axis victories up until the Allied invasion of North Africa on November 8, 1942, encouraged Hitler's natural allies to study the know-how of Nazi concentration camps. During World War I, Berlin had united India and Arab rebels. Bose and the Mufti therefore organised a meeting of solidarity at the Haus der Flieger, House of the Aviator, at the Brandenburg Gate, which housed the offices of Hermann Göring. The photo of Al-Khalani and Bose on September the 23rd, 1942, which I'm going to show you now. Here is that picture. It may date from around the Fatal Seven's visit to the artillery school with the Nazi camp near Berlin. This camp visit gave real-time insights into the Shoah, as did the visit before that by the 4 Arab aides. Luther, who attended the Wannsee meeting, accompanied these 5 guests. Because of the Soviet offensive and Pearl Harbor aftermath, the Wannsee meeting had to be postponed from December the 9th, 1941 to January the 20th, 1942. The day after the Wannsee meeting, Grobba met with the Mufti. One can assume what Grobba reported was conveyed to him directly by the Wannsee participant, Luther. The envoy witnessed Hitler's genocidal pacts with both Arabs. In signing those pacts, Hitler followed his early idea in special times to find partners who must follow the same path for their own goals. Bose, Budak, and Seyss-Inquart saw everything that Hitler was doing in real time. They deported Jews or followed Hitler's advice for raising legions of Waffen-SS police units and camp guard troops. When Seyss-Inquart met Himmler in May 1941, the subjects was SS units in the Netherlands, where Indian legionnaires had reportedly arrived at the end of 1942. And I want to show you the picture of Chandra Bose with Himmler in 1942, which is another picture that I hadn't come across before, which is of interest. Here you go. This is them in 1942. This was the issue when Himmler received Bose in his East Prussian command on July 15, 1942, which could be another plausible date for the Fatal Seven's camp visit. More likely, though, the visit occurred on or around September the 23rd, when the SS leader Gottlob Berger received in the evening Kreutz in Berlin. Certainly Budak was among them. Berger, chief of the SS main office, directed the resettlement of ethnic Germans, which meant deportation of other groups. He cooperated closely with Al-Husseini, who as a former Ottoman officer had already witnessed the work of special units that persecuted minorities. Indeed, Himmler's troops had him later name one of his lightning units As-Saika. Gerhard Rigner's mid-1942 cable alerting the Allies to Hitler's plan to liquidate up to 4 million Jews in his sphere of power in occupied Poland by no means deterred Nazi authorities and their helpers from their intentions. In early December, a clandestine report about the Mufti arrived in Berlin from Rome, where he talks with the Secret Service. Under the headline, The Mufti as Co-Worker, he laid out his position. He can achieve his own political goals only if the Axis powers are victorious. He gave 4 reasons for going along with the Nazis. One is Germany had at no time occupied or attacked Arab Islamic territory. 2, it was the only country that sought to resolve the Jewish question in a principled and radical way, a struggle he took up in a divisive manner long before 1933. 3, Germany was the enemy of England, an enemy of all Arab countries. 4, Germany was the only country capable of banishing Bolshevism. The Arab peoples were enemies of Bolshevism because of their religious attitudes. The Mufti and Al-Khalani created an all-Arab and Islamist never-peace veto to Jews, blocking in parallel British advances and Jewish emigration to the Middle East. Jews could not save themselves there, where their ancestors came from. In agreeing, Hitler limited his options. His helpers were interested in their own Jew-free countries and empires. Iraq, the former Ottoman Greater Syria, with Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, East Jordan, and the Emirates, according to the mentioned 11 points plan of 1941 that linked them to Nazi principles in the Three-Power Pact, Rome, Berlin, Tokyo. Paris and London were even to pay reparations to Arab lands. Thanks to the Allies, the Middle East did not experience the barbaric trauma that the Nazis and their local allies had planned. The Mufti, for his part, later would write in his Damascus memoirs that claims that he visited a concentration camp were a smear propagated by Zionist leaders. The Nazis, he argued, did not need me to spur them on. His policy was not extermination, instead it was and is simply to drive them out of our lands. However, al-Husseini's written pact with the Nazis, and now the pictures of his visit to a concentration camp and his subsequent close involvement with the final solution, show beyond any doubt that the Palestinian leader wanted the Jews of the Middle East to share the same fate as the Jews of Europe. On that fateful Friday, Hitler explained the nature of this joint cause to him in detail, and he fully agreed to it. Due to this new photographic evidence, again, which I want to get up on the screen for you to see again one more time. Here it is. Absolutely clear as day. So, the piece concludes, due to this new photographic evidence explained here, it seems that the last word should belong to the Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal, who asserted that the Grand Mufti met Hitler several times, that the Mufti had visited a concentration camp as part of a commission or group. Wiesenthal has been proven correct, although he may have had yet another group visit in mind. So this was translated from German by Paul Fester, and it was, I believe the article was originally written by Wolfgang Schwanitz, and he is just getting his details up, a Middle East historian living in the United States. He's authored 10 books and edited 10 books, among them Germany in the Middle East, Revolts in the Middle East, the Middle East Mosaic, and so that's who the author of this absolutely fascinating piece is. And I want to show you one final second picture that you haven't seen yet, which is al-Husseini visiting the Trebin concentration camp. Now, this picture was taken also in 1942, and there you see him again with others and with Nazis. So let's be under absolutely no illusion, absolutely no doubt that the Palestinian cause, its origins, are Nazi. And I don't mean that in a metaphorical way, I mean it in a literal way. And so once you understand that, you understand that you don't appease Nazi Germany, and therefore the leadership of the Palestinian cause, which has been about simply trying to destroy Israel, whether overtly or covertly, the approach must be, we can't negotiate with ideologies like this. Instead, we're going to have to call it out for what it is. It's not about genuine nationalism, it wants to kill the Jews, and therefore we're not indulging this anymore. That has to be the approach moving forward in order to get real, long-lasting peace for everyone on all sides. I'm Ollie Annisfels, and you're watching JTV.
Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.